Long lost and bitter, unrepentant, wild vision, yet at once touching, mild, picture of a creature scarce more than a child has come to visit. A ghost, my sister. What she asks is, what is the world I never became? And what you answer her is buried in shame. Hello everyone, I am David Wolinsky. In 2016, when I was already a grandpa, I had my first book of poems published. They were all poems that I had written 20 and more years earlier. The name of the book is The Crane is Flying, Early Poems, and it exists thanks to the extremely kind and talented people at those Madres Press, which is really just two people, and I will show you at the end of this little talk the beautiful cover to the book, which was designed by Elizabeth Murphy, half of that team. The book is divided into two parts, and you have to know that the first part, from which you will hear three poems, is called The Anguish of Air, and it is basically a memorial to my sister, who died as a teenager 50 years from pretty much the date that I am speaking to you now in 2020. So that's that. Back in prehistory, which means shortly after I was out of college and had hitchhiked to the West Coast, meaning 1969, one night in a youth hostel I had a dream. And in the dream, my sister Susan died. And in the dream, my friend Henry Weinfield, whose books of poetry, scholarship, and translation are worth reading in their own right, but in any case, he was in that dream too. And in 1970, Susan did die. And the entire first part of the book is, as I may have said, a memorial to her. And here is The Anguish of Air. In the dream, they sealed the courtyard, the windows, gables. My sister floated like a feather, ascended. The sky was sealed. Henry, my friend, you raced like a poet, shaping channels in the clouds. It didn't save her. My sister flew out a cloudy window to the air. She started to fall. It was an anguish of air. It wouldn't hold her. She slipped down like a feather from a shot swan. The courtyard surrounded, the clouds streaked red. You spiraled with grief, while old men sealed her life. At the end of part one, there is a poem in which my sister and not only all of her ancestors, but everybody else no longer with us. Well, the poem is called The Dead, and it is for Allegra Cohen Almalek and all the others. Allegra was my grandmother and Susan's, and in 50 years living in the United States, never learned English, always spoke Ladino, the Jewish dialect of Spanish that comes from Al-Andalus. So this poem is sort of about that. The dead for Allegra Cohen Almalek and all the others. The dead stand in a long line, waiting for nothing. The dead have scarves and kerchiefs of delicate embroidery. If you could admire them, your eyes would freeze in the folds, the gray borders not resolving into fire. My dead stand through 1,000 years of war. My sister leads them through time lovingly to her own lost womanhood. Bands of Arabs roam with these olive-skinned Jews through continents of want. In their unnameable courage, friends repeat their death together again and again. The dead, who are they? Are we ghosts for the dead? Generations were wrecked on the shore of human cruelty. A girl drowned in the air. I see them and the new ones in the morning starving for oxygen. The crackling of leaves falling from the tree of life is the roaring of perpetual winter in the land of the dead. The undiscovered country where I return from the border, empty-handed, broken-hearted, a scrap of embroidery to bind my eyes. The dead are standing there quietly. Part 2 of The Crane is Flying is called Improper Nouns. And of the 4 poems I'm going to read, 2 of them are the names, common names of people. One is another young woman who left too early, but from Shakespeare. And one is the name of a country. The one that I want to start with is probably the most unusual or impossible. As you're about to see, I only knew this child for a few months. His name was Ray. I met a kid with a shunt in his brain, who could not see, who could not hear, who could complain, but with groans and squeals and cranky appeals flailing his arms, he could, you see slightly. So you were a formless form somewhere, where he heard something, you hear? So you were a near direction toward which he would flail, or sometimes, oh rare miracle, you were a humming face he could grasp and twist, his lapsed wrist then swimming in the singing air, your twisted nose then throbbing happily, so you could see Ray past the smart. And he, in that grasping moment, held at last, cared for, yet still unprepared to drop back into the wet, God only knows what planet he dwells on, warm, not quite alone. Tenuously connected to you, your face, my arm, with his spastic limb, and unfathomable, possible brain. I wrote a poem called Ophelia, and over the centuries, many painters have shown us what they saw as the drowning and as the young woman. This is maybe the most famous one, painted by John Everett Millay in 1851 or so, and it is brought to us here courtesy of the Google Art Project. In my book, courtesy of me, there are two poems facing each other. The second of the two is called Cordelia, and the one I am going to read now is, of course, Ophelia. Down her watery way to spongy death went sad Ophelia, your sister, trailing vines and mosses, scraps of a bard's insides. As she floated downward, the camera floating up, the river rolling down in darker green, ferns and willows chanting the procession in dappled, chlorophylled tongues. But all supporting landscape, color, sun on water, could not keep her from the bottom's throat, could not put you on the time-struck scene in time, the heavy time frames freighted down like barges trolling misery, like fingers clutching mud. So from the depths it rises and strikes you. All such ones are your sisters. Their history slipped loose from cinemas, from the guardrail of girlish ways to slide down the banks, the moral, the common ancestry, and future tangled in disaster, because you, who could love her, could not save her, which is all, the soul, hanging like one small gull above the water, would ever search or long to do. Joe Mavora was a World War II vet, a distant relative of mine by marriage, and way back then owned a butcher shop on the Lower East Side, not too far from where I lived. He told me about this, and it became the poem Joe Mavora. Why I survived in Italy, said Joe, meaning 2 years after Anzio, is that I was a little behind the lines with those heavy 81 mortars. The riflemen usually were as good as dead. So the old tale of the old man, the hill, the shrapnel blowing past his eye that his forehead carried still. The biggest shiner the doctor ever saw in his life. Harder was hauling a casualty later down from the roiled hill. Our brave, obedient boys, the good guys, like Joe, 2 generations of war ago. Too bad I really can't dance, and there's really no way to just play you some music first. But this poem is happier and lighter, and a good pasillo would set the stage, but instead the stage is going to be simply that you are going to hear me read a poem that is called The Geography of Ecuador. Is a book on my night table. Is serrana y costeña, is the despair of Peru. Is my finger's trace on Lilia's high cheek, is the secret geology of the entire planet, is the face of untouched worlds. I want to go there. I want to go many places. I will always love books, but I want sun, ocean, mountains, altiplano, Lilia's high cheek. So I have here the Geography of Ecuador. So I stare at the book. So I share my life with una ecuatoriana, So the smell of the ocean makes me wild with longing, and in mountain air I despise pedestrian geography. With Gustavo Adolfo Becker I soar like a seabird. With Cesar Vallejo I burn in anger and shame. Soon I meet the old equator, mitad del mundo. The world divides into persons who divide the world and those who don't. What does the equator divide? Lincoln was north. Bolivar was north. Where was Eichmann? Where is Jerusalem? Kissinger. Nothing important from the south. Exiled to Tierra del Fuego, he will find me waiting. So important. So what? So what I want to know is Fidel Castro a gorilla? Are there llamas, llamas, in Tibet praying for us? Is Paul Simon indigenous? Are Brazilians imperious? What about the Chinese? Do cockatoos sing Guatemala the Beautiful? And is South America America? Guayaquil is the capital of Lilia's heart. Why is the capital of Paraguay? And in case you couldn't tell, my Ecuadorian-born wife is Lilia. Thank you. And now, a bonus track, which is not a track. If you haven't had enough, you may now, for the next 30 seconds or so, stare at what in the book is the title poem of the book. In the end, it is but word, beating its rhythm against the tide, tune you've already heard, trick already tried. And if, because it's sing in doubt, you miss the shifting melody, you need not cast your eyes about, nor heed me, nor heed me.